Hello, and welcome to another episode of Archives and Anchovies, the podcast about whatever it is I feel like talking about that week. So, the last week was really a fun week, a sad week, a frustrating week, but overall, it was a pretty good week. Took a little vacation. We went to Hawaii. It's the first time either of us had been to Hawaii and really didn't know what to expect. And what was going to be had for the week. But when we got there, we found out that there was going to be quite a bit of rain for the week. We got our rental car and started driving around, and we got greeted by some torrential rain. So that's how the vacation in Hawaii started. But it wasn't ominous for things to come. It was really a fun time. The island, we were on Oahu. It was absolutely gorgeous. There was a lot of things to do. We had some great food, and we met some really incredible people at different places out there. So it's one of the places that I think that we've been that I can honestly say that for the most part, everybody was very, very friendly. And I really enjoyed meeting just the diverse cultures that were there, the diverse kind of people that were there, and just having conversations. So it was a lot of fun in that regard. And one of the things that I'll start off by saying is I actually lost my phone. So a little sidebar here from what today's topic is, but lost my phone. And that was not such a great thing. It's interesting how really attached to technology we all are. And I know I've read and seen different memes and things like that where people will say, well, if I left my wallet at home, I may or may not go back for it. But if I left my phone at home, I'm definitely going back for it if I've already left the house. So it was kind of true. I lost it on Monday. I'd end up leaving it at a hotel that we were at where my wife was getting a spa treatment. And I was actually supposed to play golf, but got rained out. That's a story for probably another time. But I ended up leaving it there. Fortunately, through the technology, I was able to find it and be able to track it. I only received it back, though, on Thursday. That was the next time that we were in the area to get my phone. So one of the things that I thought was quite interesting is my reactions during the time that I didn't have my phone. So I lost the phone on that Monday. Like I said, went home. I was mostly mad at myself for leaving it there and not being more adult about maybe how my reactions were, because it really was something where I was going to be taking pictures. I was using it. I met somebody on the plane that was very nice, that she was from there, and I gave her my phone, and she actually put a bunch of notes in there of things that we should see, things that we could do, places to go eat. I had lost all of that because that wasn't backed up to the cloud, so it wasn't on my iPad that I'd taken. So it was something that interesting that happened. And then as I went along the next couple of days, so Tuesday and Wednesday, and really by Wednesday, I found that it was actually almost a relief that I didn't have it. There's probably some pictures that I wish I would have taken, but it was something that I wasn't stressed about. I think I'd gotten over my panic of maybe getting it back and things like that. But I really, was able to relax, really enjoy the scenery that was out there and not thinking about taking a picture of something, maybe it's something that I might never use again. Shooting video of some of the places that we had gone to, and like the Arizona, and which is going to be the bulk of this episode, the Polynesian Center. There were some places that we went that were destined to be spots we would go on the trip. And I didn't get some of those particular pictures and maybe some of those videos, but it was okay. And I was really at peace with it. And then Thursday came around, we were going to be closer to the area where I had left it. I had been tracking it with the Find My iPhone feature, the Find My Phone feature, and I was able to retrieve it. So they had it at the desk. So if anybody ever from the Ritz-Carlton Oahu ever listens to this podcast, just want to give big props out to them and their team for hanging on to it, bringing it up, finding it, and then getting it back to me in such great shape. So I give them 5 stars for the service that we received while we were there. And we weren't even guests there. So again, it was just, I was supposed to play golf there, and my wife did a spa treatment. So for somebody that wasn't even a guest, they treated us very, very amazingly. So the trip to Hawaii was fantastic. We spent 6 days there. It was overcast and rainy for a lot of it, but didn't deter us from going to see some of the sites. And one of those sites, of course, when you go to Oahu, I'm from Arizona. So one of the things that I definitely wanted to see was the memorial for the USS Arizona. And that's going to be the bulk of our podcast. Obviously, this is a story, Pearl Harbor, that has been told many times. It's been in several movies. A lot of people know about December 7th, 1941, the day that lives in infamy, as the great speech came out and said. So this is going to maybe dive a little bit deeper into the ship itself. Some things that I learned, not only about the island that day, but also about some of the things that are in the memorial. So, my hope for this podcast today is that maybe you will be a little more intrigued and you might go look some things up for yourself. Or if you're planning a trip to Hawaii, to Oahu, maybe it's something to put on your list to definitely go see, some things to check out, maybe some things that you didn't know that you wanted to, do a little bit more research on before you go. So it's very kind of interesting. The site is both, memorial, and it's somber in some ways, but there's also some things that are a great remembrance, and some things that should give you some pride if you're an American, of what happened that day and how the United States reacted. So it's probably one of the most somber sites in American history. The USS Arizona Memorial, it's at Pearl Harbor. It's near Ford Island. We're going to focus primarily on the ship itself. So, if you'll notice, the title of the podcast is BB-39 in it. And that's actually the whole designation for the USS Arizona herself. And this battleship became really, at that time, the flagship of the fleet. So it was one of the most advanced battleships that we had at the point in time. And it was really one of the heart, of the Navy at that point for several of the different operations. So it was pretty old by the time it was harbored in Pearl Harbor. So she was really a symbol of our naval power. Built in 1913, she was commissioned, and she was finished in 1916. Of the classes, she was actually a Pennsylvania class battleship. And the BB that is in front of it does designate for battleships. So, and the 39, so BB-39, designates that she was the 39th battleship in our inventory. So, one of the things that you should know about her and all ships is really, and this is something that I learned while I was there. I had asked somebody about that actually when we were on another ship, but one of the things that they do is they call ships she. And so I did some research and I wanted to find out, why all these ships are always referred to as she or her. And they've always been referred to as feminine. The she and the her have been around for centuries. And there's several theories actually that date back to why. A lot of people will trace it back to really ancient maritime traditions where ships were named after goddesses, especially female figures who were believed to protect the oceans, the waves, and the sailors as they traveled, people that were in control of things. If you've ever seen the Pirates of the Caribbean movies, they talk about Calypso. And in one of the movies, Calypso comes back to life and comes up with a maelstrom that they float around in, and basically it ends up sinking some ships. So that's one. And the other suggests that it comes from the Latin word for ship, which is navis, which is also a feminine word as far as the designation. But I think probably my most compelling explanation that I've had, and what's simpler and really kind of more human than looking at some of maybe the gods and goddesses of the time and things like that we may not necessarily believe in at this time, but they've always viewed their ships as living things. So, and it's also something that takes care of them. When we look at, let's say, an aircraft carrier, it is a floating city. It takes care of, thousands of troops. They're out there for multiple years at a time. They provide shelter. They carry you home to your loved ones. They'll protect you from the sea, and basically they'll also protect you from your enemies at the same time. So the designation she means that it's a vessel of safety. It's a vessel of survival. And typically up until, more modern times, it was an all-male environment, so there were not a whole lot of female people that were on these ships that sailed across oceans and sailed across seas. So, as far as that kind of environment goes, they're far from home. It kind of becomes their mother, their sister, their guardian, and she also demands the same kind of respect. She also demands care and attention, and in return, she keeps you safe. So they're always cleaning, they're always maintaining, they're always making sure she's in great shape. And in return, she, being the ship, will then provide that safety and protection for them. So it's just not romantic poetry. It reflects the bond that really sailors have always had with their vessels. If you ever talk to somebody's on that's been on a ship for a long time, especially if they were in a military ship, they'll refer to them very caring, very respectful, and said, they'll say she was a great ship. She was a fantastic ship. And, when a ship goes down or when she's lost, it's not just the destruction of steel and machinery to those men and women now that are on board. It's a profound loss. The sailors, they feel it personally. You'll hear veterans speak, and we heard a couple of veterans speak while we were at the Arizona Memorial. And they'll talk about their ships for decades. This person was so ingrained into that we listened to as the volunteer at the memorial. They were so ingrained into the USS Arizona that they spoke to it, as reverence and affection. And it makes it clear that, they're just not machines. They're shipmates. They're part of these individuals' lives for many, many months at a time, and sometimes cases years. So it makes sense why they would talk about it as she. So when we talk about the Arizona, and I say she or her, it's definitely something that we're honoring that tradition and acknowledging what she meant to all of the sailors that are on there. Speaking of the sailors that were on there, there were 1,512 men that called the Arizona home, and the ship itself, for her time, she was massive. So she was 608 feet long. She displaced over 31,000 tons. The Arizona was armed with 14-inch guns, 12 14-inch guns. So there was actually 4 turrets, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. And they could easily shoot 1,500-pound shells, approximately 15 to 20 miles, depending on how much powder they would put into those. So it was massive for the time. Even at this, she could still reach speeds of 21 knots, which is about 24 miles per hour. So if you think about that, that's a ship that's nearly as long as 2 football fields, carrying these massive guns, could hurl, 1,500-pound shells, and also travel at about 24 miles an hour. So just an amazing ship. The Arizona, little did I know when I went there, actually, I wasn't aware of when the Arizona was built. So she actually served in World War One. She did not see combat in World War One, though. Basically, through the 1920s and 30s, she underwent a lot of modernization. So that was the addition of like anti-aircraft guns, because air superiority became something that was much more ingrained into military. And right after World War One, there was obviously air battles in World War One, but it came more and more as times went on through the 20s and 30s. She had a lot more armor, and the fire control systems were all upgraded as well. And so by the time she was in Pearl Harbor in December of 1941, she was basically serving as the flagship because of the upgrades for the Division One of the battleships. So really, really important. When you look at the alignment, and obviously you can't see that on a podcast, so I highly recommend you go and look it up. But when you look how Battleship Row was put together, there was a ship that was in front of the Arizona, and it was kind of meant to protect her as the flagship. But we get to the 7th of December in 1941. It was a Sunday morning. BB-39. She was moored at berth F7 along Battleship Row on the southeastern side of Ford Island. So when you go and visit the site, there's 2 different sides of Ford Island that you can actually see. And she was on the southeastern side of the island. 7:55 in the morning, the first wave of Japanese aircraft struck. The Arizona's crew rushed to their battle stations, but one of the things that I learned there is that the ships were all caught in basically the worst possible condition that they could be. They were anchored. Most of their systems were in peacetime condition, so they weren't battle ready at that point in time. And then, of course, it was a Sunday morning. As we all know, there's probably church services going on, and they were, not really in a battle ready type of situation for this type of surprise attack. At approximately 8:06 a.m., that's the unthinkable happened. A Japanese armor-piercing bomb, possibly dropped from a B-5N bomber, struck near the Arizona second gun turret. The bomb penetrated actually all of the deck and detonated in or near the forward ammunition magazines. So when we got to go see the Missouri, which I'll talk about in a little bit as well, a little bit different class of ship, but when we looked at the size of the turrets and what they had in for those magazines, it was amazing. And the amount of combat ready armament that they had on these ships was obviously pretty amazing. So the explosion was just simply catastrophic. Witnesses described a massive fireball shooting hundreds of feet into the air. The forward part of the ship was essentially destroyed on impact when that bomb exploded. And of the 1,512 crew members aboard, about 1,177 were killed in this attack alone, nearly 80% of her crew. So it remains the greatest loss of life in any U.S. warship in American history. So we took a couple of different tours that day, and there were several times that this was mentioned that this was the greatest loss of life on any U.S. warship in American history. So the Arizona, obviously a flagship target for the Japanese, and they hit it with other armaments as well, but really that bomb that went through the deck and went into where the magazines were held really caused most of the damage. So after the attack, the Arizona shattered hull basically settled down to the harbor bottom. And unlike a lot of the other damaged battleships at Pearl Harbor, which included the California, the West Virginia, the Nevada, the Arizona was really beyond salvage. So some of the other ships, one even capsized. I want to say it's the Oklahoma, but I didn't put that in my notes. So somebody can always put that in the comments and let me know. But I believe it's the Oklahoma that capsized and flipped over. They were actually able to use these gigantic balloons and reverse it and flip it back over. But unfortunately, the Arizona was beyond salvage. So the forward magazines had been completely destroyed, and the ship had suffered structural damage that basically made the recovery impossible. Here's really what makes the Arizona a much different story than the rest. Rather than attempting to remove the wreck entirely and either get parts or get scrap or parts for other battleships, the Navy made a profound decision. The Arizona would remain where she fell, becoming a war grave for more than 1,100 sailors and Marines still entombed within her hull. So this is where, when you're standing over the ship on the memorial, and if this is going to be hard to explain, but where the memorial is placed and where you're standing, right outside of it is basically one of the, I think it's gun turret 2 that you get to see that's pointing towards the forward of the ship. And the ship is just absolutely massive when you're standing there. So when you are there, when you get off the boat, there's a ferry that takes you from the main part of the island over to the memorial. They tell you that it is an active military graveyard. So there are approximately 1,100, it says 1,102 sailors and Marines still are entombed within there. And so thinking about that while you're standing there over those people and reading the names that are on the wall is a highly sobering proposition, really, for anybody. Everybody there was eerily quiet, other than the volunteer that was there that was sharing a story. So it was pretty amazing to see, and just sad at the same time, of course. So in the years after the war, the superstructure, some of it was removed for salvage, but the hull remained the same. There is oil that still leaks from the ship. I did get to experience this myself. I got to see a couple of drops of oil. When you're there, there's a gigantic circle that you can see down into the water, and you can actually see that. And it continues to leak to this day. Research is kind of sketchy on how much actually comes up, because it probably does vary. But if you figure about a quart a day, and These are typically called the Tears of the Arizona. So as the ship lays down there, obviously it's leaking oil. They call that the Tears of the Arizona. So it's pretty amazing. It took approximately 2 decades for a proper memorial to be established. So once the Arizona went down in 1941, in 1958, President Eisenhower actually signed the legislation to create a memorial at the Arizona's resting place. So the design actually was a very interesting thing. So if you look up the architect, and his name is Alfred Prius, he himself was actually a refugee from Nazi Austria. And so it's kind of deeply symbolic, even though our involvement in the war from the United States standpoint was primarily with, in the Pacific with Japan regarding the Arizona. Of course, we were, overseas as well with Britain, and the Allies is on the other side as well, but primarily with Japan in the Pacific. It was, obviously not necessarily Nazis, but it's Nazi Austria. So it's a deeply symbolic thing that this person was the person that would be the architect for this. The memorial structure, it appears to float above the ship's sunken hull. It's 184 feet long with a sagging center. So you've probably seen pictures of it. If not, I would highly recommend you take a look at it. And the raised ends are basically representing the initial defeat and then the ultimate victory and the resilience of the American spirit. So the structure doesn't actually touch the ship. If you look at it, it's floating above on these big, basically steel pillars, essentially. But the ends of it are supposed to represent that, we initially were defeated and then rose up. So it's pretty cool. The memorial was dedicated on May 30th, 1962. So it was dedicated on Memorial Day, which is something that was also very symbolic. And since then, to become one of the most visited sites in the national park system. So there's almost 2 million visitors annually to the site. When we were there just before Christmas, and it was still pretty busy, even though there was some rain. So the Arizona Memorial is pretty powerful just because it's, the immediacy. When you visit, you take basically a Navy launch from the visitor center out to the memorial. And as you approach, you can see the rusted remains of the ship's structure just beneath the water. Inside the memorial itself, there's actually a shrine room where the names of all 1,177 crew members killed on the Arizona are engraved on a marble wall. And if you really want to feel what happened there, each one of those names, is somebody who had a life cut short. So there was a family forever changed. There was, people's sons on there. There was people's husbands on there. There was dads on there. There was just a tremendous amount of loss. Families were changed forever. Survivors, of the Arizona have passed away since 1941. Actually, something that's really pretty cool as far as what the Navy does. They can choose to have their ashes interred within the ship by the Navy divers rejoining their shipmates. To date, about 40 men have chosen this as their final resting place. So in addition to the over almost 1,200 crew members that were killed, another additional 40 have chosen this to be their final resting place as well, even though they survived the attack. The whole memorial is set up in a really cool way. And there is also, much more of a profound thought process to how they laid out how this memorial went later. So less than about 1,000 yards from where the Arizona rests, there's another battleship that's moored, BB-63. So if you remember our designations, another battleship, and this one's named 63. So the 63rd battleship in the inventory, which is the USS Missouri, also known as the Mighty Mo. The relationship between these two ships is just phenomenal. I had no idea, as somebody that's a history buff, when I went there, I had no idea why these two ships were there and why they were there. So now you're going to learn as well. But it really tells the complete story of America's involvement in World War II in the Pacific. So the Missouri was commissioned in 1944, so 3 years after the Arizona went down. She was an Iowa-class battleship, so a little bit different, representing basically the pinnacle of the American battleship design. She was gigantic. She was faster. She was bigger. more heavily armed than the Arizona. And while the BB-39 displaced 31,000 tons, BB-63 came in at a whopping 45,000 tons. She had 9 16-inch guns, and I got to stand right under these turrets, and it is just mind-boggling that they could shoot at the rate that they could shoot at, and just the amount of firepower that this battleship had. The Missouri served with distinction throughout the final year of the war in the Pacific. She provided a bunch of gunfire and support for invasions and serving as an anti-aircraft platform. But her greatest moment probably came on September 2nd, 1945, and none other than in Tokyo Bay. It was on the Missouri's deck that General Douglas MacArthur accepted the Japanese surrender, officially ending World War II for the United States and Japan. So if you think about the symbolism here, we have the Arizona that is underwater, represents the beginning of the war. So December 7th, 1941. And that's the beginning of the America's involvement in the war, I should say. The moment of surprise and complete devastation for the Navy at that point in time, because we had so many battleships in the naval arsenal parked right there. And then, 1,000 feet away from it, 1,000 yards away from it, excuse me, the Missouri represents September 2nd, 1945, which was the end, the victory, the moment when it was finally over. In 1998, the Missouri was towed to Pearl Harbor. She actually had served, as a long-standing active ship for a long time, but she opened as a museum and ship, permanently moored at Ford Island. The ship faces the Arizona Memorial, and from the Missouri's deck, you can actually look directly at the white memorial structure spanning the sunken battleship. It was pretty surreal, just the size of the Missouri and standing on that deck, and then you could look right outside the front of the deck and you could see the Arizona Memorial. So it actually gave me chills when I was thinking about it, and I was standing there, and the Missouri is kind of positioned though so that she watches over the Arizona, kind of like a guardian. We had the greatest battleship that we've ever built, being a guardian over one of the ships that was lost in Pearl Harbor. I'm getting goosebumps as I'm sitting here. So it's pretty incredible if you ever have a chance to go. So without hopefully getting too emotional here, I'll continue. But basically, it's definitely something that is almost poetic about it. The Missouri stands watch over Arizona's eternal rest. The Arizona's never going to be brought back into service. It's never going to be raised up. It's a grave for, almost 1,200 people. And it's just amazing. The two ships, they kind of create what some historians call the bookends of World War II in the Pacific. You start your visit at the Arizona, where the war began for America, and then you end on the Missouri, where the war officially concluded. In between the 2 points, December 7th, 1941 and September 2nd, 1945, basically it's one of the most transformative periods in American history. When we were there, we got to, tour the Missouri as well. And that is just another whole podcast episode that I can do, but pretty amazing to see the deck. They have a memorial on the deck where they actually sign the papers, and they have pictures from that period of time. They have, official copies of the original documents, the surrender documents. The Missouri was actually hit by a kamikaze, and they have a spot on the ship where it's dented. And then there's a lot of information about, kamikaze that hit the boat. So another fantastic thing. They're kind of separate. You have to pay separately to, go tour each one of those places, but absolutely worth it if you're going to go visit anytime soon. So what's remarkable about having both of these ships at Pearl Harbor is that they transformed the site of, something that was a tragedy and mourning into something more complete, a place that acknowledges the loss of all of the lives on the Arizona and everybody that was at Pearl Harbor. Because if you're there, as you'll learn, every branch of the service was stationed on Pearl Harbor. So they did have Army, Marines, Air Force. Wasn't the Air Force at that time. That was established later, but you'll have to look that one up. And then obviously the Navy. But every single branch lost life at that point in time. So, and they had certain tragedies. They were so set up for, peacetime peacetime that they just really weren't prepared. And so there was a lot of loss of life in each aspect and in each branch of the military. So the Arizona speaks really kind of to the price of war. When you look at the massive size of the Missouri, I remember thinking to myself, how the heck did they, sink so many of these? But the Arizona speaks to, what the costs were. And then the Missouri speaks to the purpose behind that price. Together, they, kind of create a narrative that helps visitors, especially younger ones who didn't live through World War II, obviously, such as myself, understand not just what happened, but why it mattered. And here's something that's really, I thought, was super powerful. Some of the crew who survived the sinking of the Arizona probably did go on to serve on different ships. I don't know if there were any people from the Arizona that were, serving on the Missouri, which would bring the bookends together. But what a thought to think that we could have somebody that was serving on the Missouri that, could have lost friends and lost shipmates on the Arizona that maybe was present at the surrender ceremony on the Missouri's deck. So just think of that person's journey from the burning waters of Pearl Harbor to standing on the deck and being on the greatest ship that was ever built at that point in time for battle. And the enemy surrendered. And not only did they surrender, but they surrendered in Tokyo Bay. So pretty cool. The interesting thing about the survivors of the Arizona, unfortunately, there aren't any left. So sadly, and kind of bittersweet, in April of 2024, Lou Conter passed away at the age of 102. He was the last living survivor of the USS Arizona. Lou was a quartermaster on the ship that morning in 1941. He was only 20 years old. So if you are in your car or you're, sitting here listening on a radio while if you're streaming this while you're, at work or something, think about that. You're 20 years old. Think about what you were doing when you were 20. He helped rescue shipmates from the burning water. And then he went to serve as a Navy pilot, actually, flying hundreds of combat missions during the war. So it is definitely something that is lost with his loss because that last surviving person of the Arizona is not there. So for decades after the war, Lou and other Arizona survivors returned to Pearl Harbor for remembrance ceremonies. They shared their stories. They kept the memory alive, ensured that younger generations understood what happened on that day. And he actually continued to speak well into his 90s. So if you think of him as 102, he was speaking there into his 90s. And he went to school events and, basically making sure that all 1,177 men were never forgotten. With his passing, we basically have entered in a new phase of remembrance. There's no longer any living witnesses, obviously, to the Arizona's final moments, but there is a greater responsibility now that falls to the rest of us. So that's one of the reasons I wanted to make this podcast. It was ingrained in me there that, there are no more survivors. And how do we make sure that people understand what happened there, what happened not only to the Arizona, but what happened at Pearl Harbor and, World War II. So, the memorial, historians, visitors who come, and anyone who hears the story, it's now our responsibility to pass it along if it seems important to you, of course. So we are the memory keepers of this story going forward. So the memorial also houses one of the Arizona's bells. One of the things that I forgot to mention a little bit earlier, and the Missouri actually displays one of hers. These bells, were used to call battle station, mark the watches, signaled ceremony and alarm. Now they stand silent and they're witness to history, but pretty cool as well to see. In Pearl Harbor, there is one of the anchors as well. I can't remember the number, but if me being in Arizona, if you go to our Arizona Capitol, right outside of the Arizona Capitol, there's also one of the Arizona anchors. So kind of cool here that, I get some firsthand knowledge of the ship and how amazing she was, up until her demise in 1941. So BB-39, the U.S. Arizona, and BB-63, the USS Missouri, two battleships separated by a lot of years in design, by time, of course, of when they were built, and purpose. Yet they're linked at Pearl Harbor. Together, they tell really the story of the war as far as the Pacific goes. The Arizona marking where our greatest war began. There was just mass destruction there. So that's what she marked. The Missouri is marked where it ended, and we eventually triumphed. So Arizona represents the 1,177 who never came home, and the Missouri represents the millions who did, and the victory that was achieved. One ship is forever sunk at the bottom of the water as a tomb, and the other one still floats above as a testament to the U.S. and our perseverance, our strength, military might, and the ultimate defeat of Japan in 1945. So unlike most of the war graves that are hidden away or marked by simple stones, so if you go to other types of burial places, there's you don't really get a feel for it other than the gravestones. But this is a ship. She was living, she was breathing, she had a ton of men that called her home, and now she is basically a memorial to all of their courage, all of their sacrifice, and their resilience. So the Arizona won't really let us forget what the cost of war was, but on the flip side, the Missouri won't let us forget that that cost was worth it, and freedom was preserved, and the enemy was defeated. So if you're going to go visit Pearl Harbor and you're walking through the full arc of America's World War II story in the Pacific, you begin at the Arizona where it all started, and you end at the Missouri where it finally concluded, and in between remember the millions who served, the hundreds of thousands who died, and our nation was changed forever. There are some other really, really cool things that are there in the museum that you can see. There's a movie that shows quite a bit about not only the Arizona, but about the day, the attack. I strongly urge you to walk around. There's a couple of things where you get to see an actual torpedo. There's a 3D image that's printed out there that's quite large that you actually can see of the Arizona memorial, and you can see how the ship lays, and you can see exactly what parts of the ship are under the water and how it's laid out. And then there's also a whole section that details what happened in Pearl Harbor that might have led up to the attack. So why were all of the ships in Battleship Row so closely moored? Why were all of the planes wingtip to wingtip? And the little hint there is they were more worried about sabotage than an attack, so they parked them very close together, which made them very, very simple targets. So a lot of different things to look at when you're there. So I highly recommend you go there, and I highly recommend that you spend a good time there as well. We were there for probably 6.5 to 7 hours, so it's not something that you should go through lightly or go through quickly. The tour on the actual Memorial of the Arizona probably is about 15 or 20 minutes that they let you be on there. But the whole complex, there are so many things to see about Pearl Harbor, the Arizona, the Missouri. There's an air museum. You can also tour a sub. So there's just some really cool stuff that you can take a look at. But the entire time, you're obviously also have a bit of reverence for the things that are there. So just wanted to share a little bit about my trip to Hawaii and my visit to Pearl Harbor and the USS Arizona. Hopefully, again, like I said, it maybe intrigues you to take a look at some of the things that were there, what the history is on the ship, what the history is for the island, and maybe how, if you go, you can maybe look at things a little bit different. You can educate people, and we can kind of keep those memories alive of the people that were, killed in that attack in 1941. So I hope if you were listening in your car, you were driving safe. If you're listening at work, I hope this was entertaining for you. As always, I would love to have you give me a follow, give me a like if you're looking on YouTube, or subscribe. And I hope that this was entertaining, and if nothing else, it was educational for you. Until we meet again, this has been another episode of Archives and Anchovies, and I am your host, James, and I appreciate you all for listening, and have a great night.